There should be some sort of like thread of how many reports we're getting leaked
sort of
about
abstract statements about
Biden's mood. I don't care about his emotions or his mood. I care about the actions that are being taken. And let's dive into this here because, you know, Biden is such an enormously committed Zionist that he is getting outflanked by his mentee, handpicked basically replacement in the Senate when he became vice president, Chris Coons, who spoke out this morning and said we should be conditioning aid to Israel, and literal Bush administration alumni. This is Richard Haas, who worked in the Bush administration, worked with Colin Powell, was a special assistant before that to H.W. Bush. Not somebody who's an outsider, not somebody who has unorthodox opinions in the foreign policy space, to put it mildly. This is very much somebody who is within mainstream thought. And what's also really notable is that he said this on Biden's reportedly favorite show that he's obsessed with. Those aren't my words. Those are the reports about how committed Biden is to watching Morning Joe on MSNBC.
Yeah, of his limited remaining sort of consciousness, a lot of it is spent consuming this television product.
So I'm happy to see that this is being said on Morning Joe. As, you know, we are up to untold levels of death in Gaza. We have no idea how bad it is because the death tolls have not been updated in around 2 months. The 32,000 figure is basically the cliff at which they could verify the dead. And even that 32,000 figure didn't include those missing and presumed dead under rubble. And that was before famine had started to set in. Famine is setting in, has set in. Israel has also made a point to bomb greenhouses, farmland, so food cannot be produced internally. This is called ecocide, which is something that they also have engaged in more moderate ways before. Whenever there was a flare-up or some active resistance by the Palestinians towards their occupiers, they would put them on even more of a diet because, as a reminder, Israel controls what goes in and what goes out of the Gaza Strip, controls their electricity, their water, everything about their daily life. So with all of that context, as we have no idea how many Palestinians have starved to death, as well as how many have been bombed to death or died suffocated under rubble, this is that former president of the Council on Foreign Relations, also Bush administration alumni, Richard Haas, imploring not just for conditioning aid to Israel, to Biden on his favorite morning program, but to sanction Israel, which is exactly where this conversation needs to start going.
Sitting around and talking how upset we are while we hemorrhage billions of dollars.
It's the worst of all worlds right now for the president. The criticism looks increasingly empty. It's 6 months. We're reaching the 6-month milestone of this war. That's one fact to begin with. And two things have happened in the last few days. One is these attacks are continuing, and yet so are U.S. arms transfers to Israel without conditions. They've been going on for 6 months. Why does Israel need 2,000-pound bombs to be used in high-density populated areas? Then, 10 days ago, what does Israel do? It expropriates 2,000 acres of land in the West Bank for settlement construction. Where is the White House reaction to that? That is how you undo even the possibility, Joe was talking about it, of one day getting to a two-state solution. If you're going to have a Palestinian state, the last I checked, states are built on territory. If the territory isn't there to build it on, you can talk about two states till the cows come home. You don't have it. Where's the administration reaction to that? So at some point, the words become empty, and the Biden administration is very close to having reached a point where their criticism of Israel is too much for the same people who criticize Chuck Schumer, but it's not nearly enough to affect the course of what is going on. That is the worst of all possible worlds.
It looks weak and impotent. You were in the HW administration at the State Department.
At the White House.
At the White House. what would James Baker have done? And seriously, that's what we should be asking ourselves, because that was a moment when we were a diplomatic superpower.
So we confronted Israel. And if you remember at the time, Israel was subsidizing people leaving the Soviet Union, and they were going into the occupied territories. We basically said to Israel, we'll help these people to get out of the Soviet Union, but we're not going to subsidize their going into the West Bank. That forecloses options. We understand you may not have a Palestinian partner today, but we want to preserve the option for the day when we might be. And the administration basically said to the Israelis, you have a choice. They made their choice. There's that economic consequences. This administration has got to have some teeth in it.
So, Richard, let me put it bluntly to you. Does Benjamin Netanyahu give a damn that Joe Biden is upset, frustrated, and outraged by what he's seeing? And if not, what would make him give a damn?
No, he doesn't. And indeed, increasingly, he's trying to position himself as someone in front of the Israeli body politic saying, you may not like me, you may think I made a mistake on October 7th, but I'm all that stands between you and American pressure. So he doesn't care. What would he care about? He would care about damaging the relationship with Israel's most important benefactor. And that would mean the United States, I'm sorry it's come to this, Willie, that we have to basically have some sanctioning of what Israel did. Not just the stuff in the UN, it's got to be conditioning arms deliveries, and it's got to be, I would think, some trade sanctions, for example, against goods coming out of West Bank settlements. Why should they be able to come here, for example, without certain tariffs or other economic penalties? We've got to we can't have a policy based on persuading Israel. We have to increasingly have an independent policy that reflects our interests and values.
Coming up, our next guest.
Wow. So the good news of that is that Biden, I think, saw that, given the fact that he is such a massive fan of that program. Sanctioning is absolutely where we need to be reorienting this conversation. We're not talking anymore about just a ceasefire. We are well beyond that particular point. What we need to be doing is sanctioning this completely rogue state.
Yeah, and I don't talk of regime change, which is like, Benny Gantz talking about some far-off elections. Who cares?
Right.
Start pressuring them. Like,
no. Time is of the essence.
Yeah.
We can't wait. We cannot wait. Yes.
Like any election that takes place in Israel that isn't under the context of, the world is sick of us doing this, we are under extreme pressure, is not interesting to me at all as like a expression of will. Yeah, it's a settler state that's in the midst of like supporting a guy who's executing a genocide in Bibi, and they are behind him. Bibi's right about that. So the pressure needs to be external and from us. Yeah,
I mean it's there was an opinion piece in the New York Times talking about how the two-state solution is actually a liberal mythology that is the less realistic solution here. If Bradley, you could pull up this map of the West Bank, and I mean, this doesn't even reflect all the settlements actually. So this is their ideal version of what a two-state solution would look like. Again, the Gaza Strip is entirely separate from the West Bank, and the West Bank does not have any of the territory on the border of the Mediterranean Sea. I mean, which is incredibly important for trade and prosperity for the country. And when you look at that West Bank map, just know that a significant portion of that territory is already controlled by Israeli settlers, and it's currently being incentivized by the Israeli government to settle there. So that from Richard Haas, that analysis was on point, except for that one particular portion there. It's going to have to be, in the end, a one-state democratic solution with full rights for all people, in the same way that South Africa had to be that way as well. A two-state solution is still racial segregation and apartheid, and is still not just for the amount of land and territory and blood that Israel has taken since the Nakba in 1948. I also will say it's quite amusing that you now hear Richard Haas, a former Bush administration, official, endorsing BDS. The S in BDS is sanctions. And for many years, and in a lot of states in this country, boycott, divest, sanctioning Israel is literally against the law. and expressing discontent towards Israel could get you fired in some states. There was an infamous case of a worker at a Texas school who I believe was Muslim American, who supported BDS and was fired from her job. So, you know, this is an indication, I think, of how far we have come in 6 months, and it took tens of thousands, and eventually it will be over 100,000 Palestinians, and that may be conservative.
Horrible way to be proven right.
Right, exactly. So we have a Republican endorsing, at least in part, BDS on Morning Joe. And will the Joe that listens to this, heed these calls? My God, it has taken way longer than I thought, because this is past the point of any rationality. This is really just an old man who can't let go of his prior romanticization of the settler colonial state of Israel. But I'm happy to see that the Overton window has shifted quite a bit.